behind lawyers whenever you see them talking. But generally speaking, these days we use a site called AustLII, Australian Legal Information Service, that set up about 19... when was it? I was still in Tasmania when they did it. It was about 1988 it started, in its very, very early stages. And it's now become a massive database of legal terms, and you'll use it, I promise you, of legal cases. It's got not all of the cases in Australian history, but it's got a very large percentage of them of all jurisdictions. So we'll have a bit of a play with that later too, to have a look at it. So now you've got this bloody judge coming in going blah blah, this is the way it is. But, is it just enough for one judge to make a statement? Because the interesting thing about judges is we now say we've got statutory interpretation, which is determined by not just what's written in the statute, and not by just the Act's interpretation and Act, and not just by the definition sections, and not just by the examples, but all of these are also subject to an understanding by a judge if it's in dispute. Now the trouble is, how does a judge make their mind up? Pardon me, I've got a frog in my throat tonight. The way the judge makes his or her mind up is by looking at, or through a process called stare decisis. Now that's Latin basically meaning stick to what's been said before. So they try and present some sort of consistency by looking at previous cases. Now, to a large extent, law has changed a lot in the last 30 years in Australia, in the judges are much more prepared to go against previous cases where it seems those cases were either poorly decided or they're no longer appropriate for the changes in our social system. So, when it comes to common law, it's not just looking at a situation of, or judge-made law I should say, it's not just a system which is there to operate independently of legislation, which it does as well. It's just law made by judges is quite independent, and we'll do another lecture on that just to show how judge-made law operates. But this is interpretation of statute which is made by judges. Now over time, judges in the 1950s and 60s and up to 2009 will make decisions. That judge will say, what does it mean? Well, the judges interpret what the legislation means, and then here comes this thing that you'd think, okay, now you've at least got an interpretation which you can rely on. The problem you've got is that once again the judges themselves are not all equal. So magistrates might make one decision, then that decision may be appealed against and goes to the county court. The county court then, there's another judge who sits on the Supreme Court, and that judge determines that in fact it's that needs to be overturned, and there's a different interpretation. And finally there'll be a full court judgment, and in the very end there's the High Court. And that's the point that we get to, so that we find at that point we get a pretty good decision. We understand then what it is. That's as far as you can appeal. The only thing that can happen now is for it to go back to Parliament, and Parliament to make a change to the legislation. Now, if Parliament is not clear about what it writes, or even if people determine that it's just worth trying to work it out and appealing through the courts, then this process can start all over again. So as you can see, there's a lot of complexity involved in understanding the operation of courts and the legal system. Okay, so now what do I want you to do? Well, I'd like you to search around the net this week and just read a few articles on Australian courts. I want you to all try and find at least one piece in a newspaper that you think involves the interpretation of legislation. It can be from any time in history, or let's say restricted to the last 5 months or something. You're not going to find much on it anyway. And that, see if you can find that up, and post into the forums what you think, what you found and what was interesting to you about it, about how they interpreted it. Okay, that's it. And on that point, I shall go.